Cheers, everyone. I've come here today to this iconic spot in America to do the next presidential spirits profile. The presidential spirit I'm profiling, you may have already figured out, is Ronald Reagan. And that, some might say, well, how could Ronald Reagan, who was a conservative icon, really the gold standard of conservatives, certainly in the time, maybe not by today's standards, but how can he play a role in a book where the themes are unity and bringing us together as a country, and getting past the bickering and the partisanship, and the answer to that is I'm drawing from the very best of these presidents, and they all had their problems. No question, every one of them. But for this novel, this president can be inspired by the very best of all of these presidents, and the very best of Reagan was pretty good, and I believe that strongly, especially when you look at things today. I mean, Reagan. When I think of Reagan, I think of him going right to the Brandenburg Gate and challenging Gorbachev. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
And within 4 years, that wall was down, and we won the Cold War. And when Reagan, and I give Reagan credit for that. And when he became president, we had a couple of rough decades in American history, starting with JFK's assassination, and then all the turmoil, cultural and racial, and gender and turmoil of the '60s. And then you got Vietnam. Then you get into Watergate and all that did to the country, and then the Iran hostage crisis really reflected poorly on America, and Reagan reasserted our place on the world stage, and he brought it back a good swagger about America, and I think and especially in his words, because when he talked about America being a shining city on a hill, and JFK had used those words, and so had John Winthrop, but they were worth repeating. America, this beacon internationally of freedom and democracy and equality, and Reagan put that into words, and he did it not just at the Brandenburg Gate, again, which I love, in West Berlin, and that speech, but he did it in the 40th anniversary of D-Day. I love that speech that he gave. He went right to Normandy to deliver, and when the Statue of Liberty, which had been renovated for years, when they relit the torch, and Reagan gave that speech at the Statue of Liberty. I think he was one of our very best. We've had some very good orators as presidents. He was certainly one of the very best, and I give him great credit for that. Another aspect of Reagan, which is worth mentioning, is his relationship with Tip O'Neill. Tip O'Neill, the powerful Democratic Speaker of the House. Reagan and O'Neill, they saw things very differently, especially with respect to the role of government in our lives. They couldn't have had more different views on that. But they were fierce rivals politically, but they came together and they were friends. And they should be an example. It's an old way. It was kind of like, Ted Kennedy and John McCain had that kind of a relationship where they didn't see eye to eye, but they would come together. And Tip O'Neill and Reagan did that at times too. At one point, there were 103 more Democrats in the House of Representatives than Republicans, and so Reagan had to work with Tip O'Neill, but he did. And by the way, they got immigration reform passed back in 1986, and that allowed 2.9 million undocumented aliens to apply for and gain citizenship or amnesty, as would be talked about today, and that was Ronald Reagan bringing that about and coming together with the Democrats on immigration reform. And he also opposed assault weapons, and so he wasn't a zealot by today's standards, but also he was able to compromise and when he needed to. And with he and Tip, I love the toast he gave to Tip when he invited Tip O'Neill to a 70th birthday party for Tip, and Reagan said, Tip, if I only have one ticket to heaven and you couldn't go to, I'd give mine away and go to hell with you. And it was just, a classic Reagan toast. He was very good at giving toasts, and I just, you think, you hear that and you see that and you see the relationship they had, and you think, well, gosh, I wish that our presidents and speakers could have that relationship now when they're from different parties, whether it's Clinton and Newt Gingrich or Boehner and Obama, Pelosi and Trump. It's just a kind of a bygone era, but we lose something when we can't have a drink with one another in the saloon or anywhere else for that matter, and just kind of sit down and see who we are as people, and can we come together, and my gosh, shouldn't we be putting the country over the party? And the nice thing is, in this book I use the words of the presidents themselves, from speeches, letters, memoirs, and I love drawing on Reagan's words because of this image and this vision he had for America. And and his life was very interesting. It's a remarkable life, and it, of course, Hollywood, he starred in 50 films, but before that even, he was a baseball announcer for the Cubs, of all teams, and he would recreate the games. He wasn't in the stadium. He was in Iowa recreating the games by telegraph, and he recreated the 1932 World Series game where Babe Ruth's supposed called shot. By the way, FDR was at that game, which is wild to think of, but Reagan was announcing that game in Iowa, recreating it by telegraph, and he went from that. He came out to Catalina with the Cubs, where they used to train, and used some connections to get some introductions in Hollywood, and he ended up in Hollywood, and he starred in 50 films, including his most famous might have been Bedtime for Bonzo. He called himself the Errol Flynn of B movies. He starred in a lot of B movies. He also starred in one of the most iconic films of all time, Newt Rockne, All-American, of course, about Notre Dame's George Gipp and Newt Rockne, and which is right up there with Casablanca, of course, right? Of some of the greatest films of all time.
Rock, someday when the team's up against it, breaks are beating the boys, ask them to go in there with all they've got, win just one for the Kipper. I don't know where I'll be then, but I'll know about it. I'll be happy.
You're gonna have to give me just a minute, please. All right, but just a remarkable life. He then became the Screen Actors Guild president. Was drafted by California Republicans. He had been a New Deal Democrat. He had been a follower of supporter of FDR in the 40s, and but he became more conservative in time. Certainly a lot more conservative. And then ran for governor of California, won by 1 million votes in 1966, and that brings up another point. He was really popular as a president. He beat Jimmy Carter. He won 44 states to beat Jimmy Carter. He won 49 states to beat Mondale, and his approval ratings after the first couple of years, his approval ratings were mid-60s, and even today. He's still viewed fondly and favorably, and I think it's because of the way he could speak, and when you can think of Reagan, you can think of some of those images of him just leading the charge and on the world stage for America, and just a great vision of what America's proper role is. So dogs play an important role in the book, and since every president, well, at least the first 44 presidents, all had dogs. So for Reagan, he had Lucky, which was a dog that they brought to the White House but just got too big, and so they lucky came back to California and to the ranch, the Santa Ynez Mountains, which I'm sure is really a step up in my mind, the California coast. But then William F. Buckley, who another conservative gold standard guy, gave the Reagans Rex, a much smaller dog, and perhaps in their minds more befitting of the White House, and also when Reagan was in Hollywood, he had two dogs. This is noteworthy. They were called Scotch and Soda, and since drinking is a theme in the book, and I like to draw on what each of the presidents themselves like to drink. The word on Reagan was he really didn't drink much. I think if he named his dogs Scotch and Soda, we might be able to reevaluate that. But that was when he was in Hollywood. So he drank. He would have beer or a part of a beer with Tip O'Neill at times. Also, he liked for state dinners. He would serve Silver Oak, a classic Napa Valley, California wine as well. I loved writing the book. I loved especially writing about Reagan and many of the others. I'm doing more of these profiles as well, and I think you'll get a kick out of reading it. My gosh, America, we're better than this. So much better, and we all know that. Cheers.